Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Building and Housing. Does he stand by his statement, "I want to do things as Housing Minister that are going to make a material difference to my kids and their generation having access to more affordable homes"? If so, is he still confident he can do that under the terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, absolutely, and the TPP will help housing affordability in three ways. The measures of housing affordability use three components: incomes, interest rates and house prices. TPP will grow the incomes of New Zealanders by giving Kiwi businesses access to markets of 800 million people, representing 36% of the world's economy. As John Key and former Prime Minister Helen Clark said, we're not going to grow incomes by selling stuff to ourselves with a population of just 4.5 million. Secondly, TPP helps the competitiveness of the materials and technologies that build homes. I welcome the entry of alternative technologies from countries like those in the TPP that actually help us build more affordable homes. Thirdly, open markets help keep interest rates and inflation low, and members opposite need to recognise that interest rates are at the lowest level in 40 years, and that's a big help to the affordability of young families wanting to own their own home.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Do the provisions of the TPPA mean New Zealand will not be able to ban non-resident foreign buyers from buying existing homes?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, yes, but we don't believe that will make any difference to the price that New Zealanders pay for homes. That certainly is the experience in Australia, and I do find the opposition party's position very confusing when they say they're quite happy to have Aussies buying New Zealand homes, but if they happen to be Canadians, Americans, or maybe those with Chinese-sounding names, they have a different position, although there are so many different positions that the opposition's parties had on TPP.
Order. Member, Minister can resume his seat. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Is he aware that last year Australia's restrictions on existing homes being purchased by non-resident foreigners drove nearly $30 billion of foreign investment into residential property development, more than the total value of residential construction in New Zealand in the same period? And does he really consider that to be ineffective?
Mr Speaker,
the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Absolutely, the Australian policy has not worked because the prices of homes in Australia have gone up by more and are less affordable than what they are in New Zealand. And if the Labor Party believes that Australia is the answer for housing affordability, they need to explain why the housing price in Melbourne and Sydney is significantly greater than what it is in Auckland, and actually just shows what a nonsense Labor's Chinese-sounding name policy is in respect of housing.
Mr Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, Phil.
Can he confirm?
Order. Supplementary question.
Can he
Phil Twyford.
confirm that some of the countries, the members in the TPPA negotiations, successfully protected future lawmaking on issues like housing ownership? And if so, why didn't his government?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, the TPP, of which I think this House should be tremendously proud of the work that Tim Grosser did, specifically enables the government, if it wishes, to put a stamp duty or other measure that is an option that might be effective if we were concerned about foreign ownership. Our government's position, though, is that we're going to make the decision on the basis of facts, not Chinese-sounding names. That's why we've passed legislation that will give us those facts.
Order. Phil Twyford, point of order.
Mr Speaker, it was a very specific question about future lawmaking protection.
Order. I think the member's got a reasonable point. Can I invite him to repeat the question for the benefit of the Minister?
Thank you. Can he confirm that some of the countries in the TPPA negotiated protections for future lawmaking on issues like housing ownership, and if so, Why didn't his government?
Because
The
we did.
Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The minister responsible, Tim Grosser, specifically included provisions that might be used by our government, such as a stamp duty that could be imposed on overseas owners, because it is our view that the instrument of a ban that that member has advocated is inconsistent because it would not apply under even his policy to Australia, would be inconsistent with the FTA that his government negotiated with China, and would not make any material difference to the core issue of improving housing affordability for Kiwi families.
Order. That concludes questions for oral answer.